Is porn harmful or is it okay? Please like, subscribe, and share. Hit the button down below. I'd really appreciate that. So, no surprise, sexual impurity has been around since people have been around. It's not a new concept. It's always been something that's been there. It's always been a struggle. It just has changed and evolved as time has gone by. And the middle of the 20th century is when things started to ramp up. As different media forms started to come along, we started with magazines, then we had videotapes, DVDs, streaming, and now just with everything that's online, and with every opportunity we have with our cell phones, all of this started to become a lot more prevalent. So specifically with the access to porn. And as we got through each new technological advance, porn came right along with it. When I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Porn was a thing, but you had to actually go out of your way to buy it. You had to go out of your way to do it. You had to go out of your way to see it and get it. And again, that's totally changed. We're in an unprecedented time in our entire history with the accessibility to obviously things like entertainment, work, information, and then unfortunately, pornography comes right along with that. The Catholic Church defines the 7 deadly sins. Each sin separates us from God. But the 7 deadliest sins are pride, greed, envy, anger, gluttony, lust, and sloth. We're not going to talk about many of those today. We will mention pride. Pride is the chief sin because it causes us to be alienated from God. We tell ourselves we don't need God. In some ways, we almost become our own God. And that's where pride is the biggest problem, that we don't need him. What we're going to talk about is lust, and is specifically lust in the form of pornography. And is it harmful or is it not? Lust probably, at least in this day and age, you could argue is the most popular sin, but it's not in fact the worst. Now, it doesn't mean it's not a problem. It doesn't mean it's not deadly. It just means pride is number one and these others are right behind it. There are obviously issues. There's a reason they're all called sin, because they all separate us. From a Christian perspective, we know that viewing porn and acting out on porn is a sin against lust. And even in the past number of years, over the last 20 or so years, there have been psychologists and therapists and counselors who are coming to the conclusion that not even from a Christian perspective, but just from a psychological perspective or from an emotional perspective, a mental perspective, that porn is very harmful to those who view it. One of the first ways that a lot of us can see porn being a problem is through isolation. Porn is very rarely, it's not like people go and view it with a lot of other people around. It is an isolating activity where you draw into yourself and you go and spend whatever time you're going to on your phone or on your computer, and it's not something that you broadcast, it's not something that you're proud of, it's not something that you go and do, but it's isolating. It draws you away from people. Again, isolation, at times proper isolation is not a problem, but this is directly tied to porn, where we live that in an isolated bubble. Right alongside with that is it messes up how we socialize with people. Again, because of that isolation, we're not with people. We're not socializing with people. We see these different relationships on the computer. We see these different things which are not real. And it messes up our perception of what these relationships are, what they should be, what these expectations of these relationships should be. Very simply, too, it fills our mind with unhealthy images. If we're eating all the time, it's like for our body. If we're eating Hershey's candy bars every day and having Big Macs, we're not going to feel well after a while. We're probably going to put on weight. We're not going to do too well. We're going to get sluggish. And a lot of times that draws us to want to do more of that. So we can do the same thing with our mind. If we're only feeding our mind, I shouldn't say only, but if we're feeding our mind a lot of junk and it's really unhealthy images, that's continuing to, what's going on in here is being built upon that in a lot of ways. It fuels unrealistic fantasies and expectations. A lot of us men have struggled with porn at times, and every one of those is unrealistic. There's not something that is a real situation. So it's kind of like, in some ways, this is a little bit of a different tangent, but from a romantic perspective, kind of like looking at a Hallmark movie, although those are obviously a little bit more safe. But even those set an unrealistic expectation for what romance is. So porn sets an unrealistic expectation and puts these fantasies in our head about what these things could or should be. And if they're not, then there's a problem. I think real simply, it wastes our time. There's a number of different statistics I've seen, all these different statistics, and depending upon the motivation that people give for their stat will tell you so many different things. But just in talking to different people along the way, kind of doing my own research with people that I talk to and I hear about and I work with, there are times where hours a week people are viewing porn. And so that's just a time waster. What are you taking that time away from that could be more constructive? Because if you think about it, there's nothing constructive about porn. There's nothing there. It's just viewing this, getting these images in our mind. We may act out on it, and then it's not fulfilling. It's not constructive. Porn also wastes tons of money. The latest stat that I just looked up on how much money does the porn industry generate is $97 billion. And that was last year. $97 billion is a big number. And where does that come from? That comes from all of us folks who are willing to pay for it. And that's just wasted money that we will never get back, and we really get nothing for that money. We just get emptiness. We just feel like crap, and we're just wasting that time, wasting that money. The discussion that's been coming up a lot more, too, in the last number of years is that viewing of porn is addictive. They say it's as addictive as cocaine. And when we think about an addiction, that's not something that we want, right? And I think some of the ones that have some stigmas to them, obviously, are somebody who's an alcoholic. And it's sad if anybody has an addiction. We all have our things we struggle with, and it's difficult because it's something that seems to be beyond our control. So we don't want an addiction. We don't want to put ourselves in a spot that's going to give us an addiction. And again, people would say it's not addictive. It is. If you read into things and you talk to enough people, you see how addictive it is. It's just like alcohol and cigarettes, gambling. It's the way people act out. And so the question is that something you want in your life, to be addicted to this? And maybe you're struggling with it. Maybe you find it hard to give up. And that's a test. If you're not sure whether you're addicted or not, what people will say sometimes, if they're kind of in denial, is, oh, I can give this up anytime I want. I don't really need this. I can stop anytime I want. The problem is nobody ever chooses to stop, and because they can always justify it. So that might be something, if you're struggling with it, to try to stop and see where you're at. Again, if you're having trouble with it, there's ways to deal with it, which is not for me to deal with in this video. But it's just something to kind of consider. It has proven itself to be addictive, regardless of what some people will say out there. It is an addictive activity. In my own life and with people that I talk to, I have only seen porn and masturbation as there's nothing positive about it. It's a sin. It's a problem for a number of the different reasons that I listed here, others included. So people might disagree, like I said. You might be able to see things, you go on Google, other people will argue, depends on what their perspective is on things. But my answer is it harmful? Maybe just a little bit. Can I do that? Well, is a little bit of poison okay? Is a small rattlesnake bite gonna be okay for me? I would rather default to not take that chance. If you can, please like, subscribe, comment, and share my video.